Thank you, Zaina. Namaste. It's so good to be here with you all tonight. And we're just fresh out of a beautiful English storm. So it's got that, everything seems really, really alive at the moment, really fresh. That smell that comes in the air after a storm is just amazing. So I wanted to use this time to share a little bit of my story, or maybe a lot of my story, my own personal awakening, if there is such a thing. Oxymoron. But because there is something that I've been hearing over and over again this week and for the past few days that really touches my heart. And it is several times I've heard this sentence said in various different ways, that somebody's saying to me that they feel they're the only one struggling at the moment with their awakening, or they're the only one that isn't getting it, or that they're the only one that isn't deepening, or similar statements and sentiments, that they are just not getting it. So they're the only one struggling. And when we're in that place, when we're going through a really dark time in our awakening, it can feel extraordinarily real and true that we are the only one. It feels like we are the only one. And somehow we seem to hear everyone else when they're having an up moment, when they're having a breakthrough. And it can give us a real sense that we're the only one going through it, as we said. So there's something going wrong in our awakening, something going differently to everyone else. And perhaps most importantly, the sense that we shouldn't be having these more difficult, challenging moments, that something is going wrong, perhaps we feel, because of that. And I wanted to really share my own journey, just a little bit about my own awakening, to really kind of hopefully put the idea to bed, the sense that you might be the only person that is going through something awful at the moment in terms of your awakening. Because it really was the same for me. And I know I say that about everything, but really some of the major moments that I remember from my own pathway were the most difficult ones. The times when I wanted to give up, the times when I actually gave up, and then the times when I came back again. I always give up and swear, that's it, I'm never watching another satsang ever. And then 5 minutes later, I've got a book in my hand that I'm diving into. And somehow this myth has been perpetuated that awakened beings, maybe teachers especially, didn't have those moments, or they might not have had so many of them. And it's just not true. There is absolutely nobody that gets away without these difficult times. And it is, as you perhaps come to see in your own awakening, it is these difficult moments, these challenging times that we go through in our experience that really shapes us and forges us into, it builds a fire inside. And although we would never choose to go through these moments, it does leave us in a different position afterwards. So this can be something that is going on in our life. It can be something that's only seemingly going on inside us. It might be that there doesn't seem to be any reason particularly why we're feeling this way, where there's all this emotion, all these doubts, times like that. And there was a particular time in my awakening when I became obsessed with St. John of the Cross and his writings on the dark night of the soul. I was trying to figure out what they were and if there was a way to work with them. Because at least half of the time, at least, probably more, in my own journey, I didn't have a clue whether I was going in the right direction, whether I was doing the right practice, whether I was actually getting anywhere. And at least 70% of the time, I was doubting myself. I felt certain that I would never wake up, ever. I felt embarrassed for even wanting to think that it could even happen for me. So it was my little secret that I kept to myself. I just told everyone I was into meditation, which wasn't really untrue. But I didn't even dare to really admit to myself that I wanted awakening, let alone anyone else. And they were terrible times. They were dark times. And they were great times. And every time I thought I'd been through something terrible, I thought that was the last time. And every time I went through something beautiful, had a beautiful experience, I was sure that I was never going to go back to that difficult place. And each time I was wrong, of course, each time I was proved wrong, because I began to see that after each opening, after each seeing, there was an upsurge in things that needed to be looked at, let's just say, that were no longer in alignment with my essential nature, what I had just seen even clearer. So for 99% of my awakening, maybe more, I was stumbling along, not having a clue where I was going, and not really trusting my own guidance inside, not really trusting myself. Certain still that it wouldn't happen, as I've said. I was convinced I didn't deserve it, convinced I had things I had to sort out first before it could happen, wanting it desperately, but absolutely certain that if I did get it, if I did wake up, that I wouldn't be able to be a good parent anymore and fulfill all the roles that I had to as a human being. So it's important, I think, to kind of discuss this, because we tend to see awakened beings after they've been through those moments and come out the other side, after they have weathered the storm of the ego and made it through to the other side where there's peace and calmness. And it can be easy sometimes to look at them and think they're not going through what I'm going through, and therefore I must be on the wrong path. I must be doing something wrong. I must be doing the wrong practice. But what if part of our awakening, as I found out, is actually really beginning to embrace the uncomfortable moments? Of course, not liking them, but that whenever I feel uncomfortable, then that means that I'm going into some new territory. I'm going into some part of my consciousness that I have previously protected and kind of held away from my seeing. So I really just wanted to share this with you because I felt really moved today, over this past week, but especially today, to say that it is like that for everyone. And just because you feel that you're the only one doesn't make it so. We are kind of warriors in a way, aren't we? We are going to places in human consciousness that most people don't even want to. Of course, no disrespect to them, but they're not ready to wake up and see the truth. And we're calling into question everything, only everything that we have believed to be true in our awakening. And we're going to call into question our ability to see through all this and to come through and out the other side. Everything that we've held dear, although it may have been painful as a separate being, everything that we've held our self-identity as a person, as a someone, and all of our goals, all of our dreams and desires, we're going to have to look at over the time that the awakening matures and blossoms into a very experiential thing. And if you feel that you're stumbling along, if you feel that you don't have direction, if you feel that you're doubting whether it can happen for you, or whether you deserve it or not, or whether you're understanding enough to wake up, or any of those things. I really would just like to say that all of those things don't matter. Of course, they matter inside how we feel, in terms of how we feel, but they do not stop your awakening. You absolutely do not need to know where this journey is going. You don't need to know the next step. You don't need to know how to fix the next thing or transcend the next idea. You don't need to know how to deal with doubt. You don't need to know how to awaken. You don't need to know any of that. All of that is going to come to you. All of it is going to come to you, the next step in your journey. How to move forward is going to be given to you as you just keep going. Maybe that is the only thing that you can and are responsible for. Maybe that is the only thing you need to work on, is to fuel this desire for awakening. Just keep building that fire inside. And that's what I did with every dark night, every disappointment, every doubting moment, every moment of unworthiness, every sharp sting when some experience happened that I really didn't like, every time I questioned myself and my abilities, then I decided that it was one time closer to never feeling that way ever again. And I became determined. I turned those energies into determination or passion or fire or whatever we want to call it. So nobody gets out of that part of awakening. Times when we're sure it's not going to happen. Times when we can't even remember why we began this path. Times when we just want to go back to sleep because somehow that seems easier than pushing on through. Times when we feel very trapped because we've come too far to go back to sleep and yet are not already through the embodiment process of awakening. So if you've had those or are having those, if you're in a moment of self-doubt, I want to share with you that you're absolutely in the right place and that all you have to do is keep going, even if you don't know what that looks like in the next moment, even if you have no clue what the right path is for you, it will appear in front of you. And I would like to say that it isn't an exaggeration to say that most of my awakening process was 25 years plus, stumbling around the first 5, 6, 7, maybe not even realizing what I was looking for. And then the next 10 years desperately seeking it when I found out what awakening was and got a hold of it in my mind. And then battling with doubts and unworthiness and all of that. But maybe coming through all that really isn't on your to-do list. Maybe that we've had this idea that we have to come through this ourselves, that we have to deal with all this stuff ourselves. And maybe that's just not true. Every time I just took another step forward, somehow the way was cleared for me. How that happened, I have absolutely no clue, except to say that I felt that I was being looked after and that everything began to feel as if I was being encouraged and loved and invited to continue deepening. And I had no clue what that meant. I used to read all these books and listen to all these teachers that had achieved this beautiful state of consciousness, and I wonder how on earth I could ever expect that it would happen for me. And it still sometimes seems amazing that something has happened. So you're never going to perhaps come to your awakening process feeling, now I'm really getting somewhere. Now I'm really on the right track. And maybe it's going to be more like, I have no clue what I'm doing and I'm not sure I'm doing the right thing. And I don't know what the next step is. Maybe it's going to be always more like that. And I'm not trying to be negative, as in we have to have a horrible experience. But can we accept that if we are having a horrible experience right now, then that just makes you part of the sage club? You know, if there is a club of things we have to go through to wake up, some dark times might be those internally at least. And we're calling into question everything that we have believed. That's not necessarily going to be an easy process. But already, because it started within you, means you have everything you need to achieve that. There is nothing external that you need that won't come. The power, the conviction, the courage, the bravery, the commitment, the sheer bloody-minded conviction, you know, that got me through. It's all already within you. It's already waiting and being activated as we're going through each day. Each dark moment is fueling, it's shoveling coal on the fire, the desire for freedom, for liberation. And I have to tell you that I never overcame that feeling that I wasn't going to make it. I never really managed to overcome that feeling that it wasn't going to happen for me. It just really started to happen for me, and those thoughts became less and less relevant. And my mind will probably still be telling me right now, it's just never going to happen for you if I really was listening. So can you carry on anyway? Can you build a greater fire inside? Can you recognize that this is the journey? It's not necessarily always going to be, or at least even 50-50, a positive thing. Sometimes you're going to feel like giving up. Sometimes you're going to feel that it's not going to happen. Sometimes you're going to feel that there's no point in even trying. But you can and are making this happen already. The only thing, and I do mean this very literally, the only thing is just don't give up. Even if you do give up, you'll be drawn back to the path at some point. It happened for me. I walked away for 3 months once and had no focus at all in that point in my life, and suddenly somehow found myself back anyway, despite my grumpiness at the time. How have I ended up back here doing this again? But it became clear that there was something that was driving this awakening that wasn't going to stop. Something powerful, the self, was going to awaken despite my insecurities and doubts and all of that. And maybe you can feel that inside as we're talking like this. Maybe you can feel that there is something inevitable about this, that mind says if, and the self says yes. Your mind says if it's going to happen, the self says yes, it's already occurring. And that you don't have to get rid of the if and the doubter inside, because it's really just how much attention and relevance you're giving to that. And if there's one thing that every sage has learned to do, it is to trust in the power and the intelligence of the self to see us through this kind of difficult time, this long and windy path that feels like we're not getting anywhere. There was a trust for me that developed eventually that just began to override the doubt that it's happening, it must be, it must be, it must be. And then I began to see some evidence of it, which got me even more excited. I began to experience moments of peace, clarity, And even when I had these dark times, they didn't last so long. I didn't push against them quite so hard. And most of that 25 years was stumbling around in the dark, trying to find a roadmap. Or so I thought at the time. And when I look back now, it was an expertly crafted 25 years by the self. Every experience I needed to have to show me what I was still believing. And that's still deepening now, it's still going on now. So everyone's awakening looks like it's not happening. Everyone's journey may look to you, your own journey may look like it's not happening like mine did. But I hope this gives you a more realistic understanding of what my own awakening was like. And if it seems that I have all this wisdom now, it's really only because I've stumbled from one to the other and distilled down into what really is the error in thinking here through trial and error and trial and error and trial and error. And that same process is happening inside you, isn't it? You're really coming to see what part of your thinking isn't working for you anymore. And then looking at that with a different viewpoint, comparing it to what you've seen to be true about yourself in some way. And when you're self-inquiring or in meditation or spontaneous insight, and then releasing the old way of thinking. So I'd really like you to remember that you only ever see, we only ever really see an awakened being after they have completed that process in terms of releasing the majority of thoughts, the belief in the thoughts that are causing suffering. But don't think for a moment that they had a get out of jail free card. You know, they have gone through exactly what you're going through right now. The crushing doubts, the guilt, the shame, the fear, all of that is inherent in the human experience, isn't it? Every single one of us came out the other side of that as an example that it can and is occurring. It can be hard to believe that within your own awakening. I don't think there's ever been a single awakened being that spent the whole time going, this is really happening for me. I'm getting really excited now. Or maybe for 10 seconds and then for the next 10 months there was, this is just not happening for me. I'm going to give up in this. And I hope you can find within yourself that place of power that just will not give up. Can you feel it? It's just kind of sheer dogged determination in getting to where we want to be. And my own awakening was fueled by this determination, jealousy of what other beings had. I was always jealous, watching all these satsangs with all these beings having breakthroughs, and I was very angry and jealous. And it was really that jealousy that just fueled my, I want to be where they are and I will not accept anything else. And desperation, that it was desperation also that fueled my awakening. I just cannot go back to being a separate being. I cannot live in that place for another second. I cannot and will not. And there is nowhere backwards for me. So if you're in that desperation of that, I so remember the taste of that. It was a close friend. I was going to say good friend, but it was a close friend for at least 10 years, desperation. And I'm not saying you have to be desperate for 10 years. You're almost at the end of that, the fact that you're listening to these words, maybe already at the end of that. You've done all the hard work to get to this point. But I just wanted you to recognize that there is nothing wrong with you because this is occurring in your awakening. It is far easier for a human being to stay asleep to their essential nature and to the nature of everything and everyone. It is easier, but much less comfortable, of course, to keep believing in illusion. And it is much less effort, at least initially, to believe the same old thoughts rather than questioning them. So I want you to take a look at the courage and the conviction and strength that you're already showing, already bringing forth through your spiritual practice. How many times do we fall and get back up again, and fall and get back up again? And something inside is just leading us on, get back up again, get back up again. And it was the same for me. And that something inside is the truth already coming to the forefront, and it will not let you fail, despite what your mind says. You are already what you're seeking, therefore you cannot fail. It's just a question of how long it takes us to question some thoughts that are causing us certain challenges in our experience. And I also just want to remind you that this is the most important endeavor that any human being can ever undertake. And I know that you know that, but it does bear saying again, because it is so important that we recognize the importance of what we're doing. And that it's hard for any human being to go against the herd, to go against the usual thinking. And you're doing that already. You're already challenging the comfortable thoughts that everyone else holds on to. And that's pretty amazing, I think. That's unusual and to be celebrated. I didn't really mean this to turn into a lecture or a pep talk, but it's something that I'm really, really passionate about. We don't give ourselves a pat on the back enough. We are so hard on ourselves, and especially about awakening. Here you are still, you're still here. You're still trying, you're still moving, you're still open, you're still wanting to see. And that is the only qualification that I would look for in someone to see whether they're going to wake up or not. That is the only. You don't need any other skills. You don't need any fancy mind intelligence. You don't need it to have read all these scriptures. You don't need to be well versed in Sanskrit or anything. All those things are things that happen along the way for some of us. You already have passed the test in that you are here listening to this. You found your way to this beautiful group and you are already pursuing awakening. Nothing at all can stop you. I hope you realize that. Least of all your own mind. It can slow you down, but only because it may cause you to agree with the doubts. But the infinite self that you are, the power that creates all of this. You know, if you've ever stood in the middle of a storm, I know we don't get storms here in the UK like we do in the rest of the world, but if you've ever stood in the middle of a storm, you can feel that power. If you've ever seen an atom split, you can see that power, enormous power, and it's inside you right now in every single atom of your being. How can that power possibly fail to get what it wants when it wants to see itself clearly? What obstacle could get in the way of that? So please don't feel that you're the only one. I know it seems like that. I remember really clearly where we feel isolated, we feel closed off, we feel alone, we feel totally unsupported, unloved. But it is just not so. There is so much help, and that help can come from so many surprising places. And if you don't know how to access that, then you simple A simple prayer such as "help me." It was my mantra most of the time. Just help me. I'm totally stuck. I don't know where. I don't even know who I was asking. But help always came every single time. And eventually I just kind of stayed in that open place. Help, please help. I don't know what I'm doing here. I just know I have to be free. I have to. I just have to. Nothing else seems to have any attraction or pull when you get to this point anyway, does it? It has to fulfill itself when you get to this point in your awakening. So if you feel a little bit obsessed, if you feel a little bit of a one-track pony, mixing my metaphors there, sorry, then you're in the right place. You're going to need that obsession, you're going to need that fire, you're going to need that fuel to get back up once you've stumbled again. So I hope that has inspired you and not terrified you, maybe a little bit of both. But it's always helpful. It was always helpful for me on the journey to hear stories of awakened beings, because it just puts aside those myths, doesn't it? That they've somehow had a different journey than you're having right now. And it gave me courage that if they had found their way through it, that so could I. And that they didn't know either what they were doing all the way through, perhaps how you feel right now. But I hope you feel more loved and supported, and I hope you feel more inspired and courageous, and I hope you feel just a little bit or a lot more certain that it absolutely has to happen for you. If I can just get you to feel that it's not an if, there is no if. It's not an if you'll awaken. There is no if in this. And I know I've said that before, but it really is sitting in my heart right now because of what I've been hearing all week. And if I could somehow put you in my head and you could experience all of my memories about my own process, you'd see that it's exactly the same as yours. Exactly. And if you could see me 20 years ago, you would have said, this person's crazy. They're never going to wake up. You just would not have thought, probably. So anyway, I've spoken more longer than I wanted to there, but if anybody would like to share their own experience, or if anyone is going through a difficult time or exciting time, I'd love to hear about it and to talk to you. And I really just want to inspire you, hopefully, to believe in yourself more. So, Avishag, when you're ready.
Yeah, I really enjoyed what you shared. In a lot of ways, stuff that I've come to see, but there's this phase that I'm going through right now where I do want to study skillful teachings more deeply. And, sometimes they're saying things that I guess are triggering, like this idea of your 7 years, you know, for in Buddhist, you can become free. And I've already seen that this method, this non-duality, everybody's going through the same process of learning, and you can say you're in so that, okay, I got it. People aren't just snapping into it. But it reminds me, when I was 5 years old, I was swinging on a swing, and I had this awareness that it was possible. I knew it wasn't likely but there was possible that some person walking by would have this quiet mind. And even though I didn't have issues with having a busy mind or anything, there was this instant, this knowing that was something that was wonderful to have. And there was this instant tantrum, I could say, or reaction of being mad. I didn't know how to find someone to show me. I wanted to know. And I guess I went through that isolation phase as a young child. So that was very intense. And I still feel the emotion of the intensity of it all. But there's been this inner guidance. Like I couldn't even be tempted to get sucked into worldly ideals because I would just see them as a dead end. So I must have learned that before. And so I feel like there's this benefit that I had of not being able to uh, connect with the same, you know, ideals that all the other children or people, they would just be jumping on this bandwagon, so to speak.
Yeah.
And there's this training also that happens of this world not making sense and then needing to have a place to rest, and how that itself was a tempering, like a process helping me to become more discerning. So then, jumping ahead to today, I'm still dealing with that dynamic of constantly this. I love it's like the nectar of the gods. When I listen to good talks with really good teachers, it's like I'm drinking in this.
Mhm.
Oh, it's wonderful,
Yeah.
lovely stuff. But at the same time, I'm also going to be interacting with these messages that I don't quite get right away. And then I have to, it's like this grounding process of centering. Like I have to see, oh, this is how this fits. So there's been this, I guess, this journey of seeing it for myself. And I've never been able to just find one path or one community or one place.
Mhm.
And I feel like in that there's this teaching of I must see it myself.
Yeah.
And it's okay because I can. It's just I have to go through all that
It's
temper.
very similar for me there. I was just devouring every teaching and teacher I could get my hands on. Like I was kind of obsessed with everything I could. I wanted to hear every way I could and still do, because there's something in that, isn't there, when you do that. And not really, um, for a while it was my way of avoiding actually committing to a particular teaching, guru shopping. Um, but there's something there, isn't there? Let me see what else I can absorb in this. And
Yeah. Every community, every teacher has a different style, and in their different approach, it's opening something. It's allowing me to adjust from a different way and get over some uptightness, because I have a lot of uptightness, but that came from I had to be very like steady and firm and focused to get through earlier phases. So it's like it's kind of getting purified also.
yeah, what served us before may no longer serve us now, and vice versa, right? So there's a process of opening up there happening, and things that you needed before you can release now, perhaps.
Yeah. And even the releasing process has to be incremental.
Yeah.
And so there's this back and forth that I'm still dealing with about following that inner guidance and being certain, and because the connection is really potent, and yet also not being sure, like should I pivot, should I do things differently, and that's been happening a lot lately. So it's like I've been doing this purification investigative type of style, which is it's very powerful. I'm labeling, I'm noting, and it's something that I learned on my own. I didn't really get taught it, but then I realized it's a teaching, right? But I didn't learn the official version. And in that, I free to continually explore and unfold. But then there's always this message of um, having to abandon that and practice other things. So that's the challenge of different styles. On the one hand, it keeps me from being in a rut and doing one thing one way.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, there's like this, that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of
It just helps to kind of check out your motivation. For me, it helped to check out why am I going to this other teaching? Is it an unconscious avoidance of something I need to look at within this one? Or is it that I feel a pull in my heart to take in some other way, to listen to some other way as well? So if the motivation's right, then that's the inner guidance working, isn't it? If it feels good to do it, if it's come out of excitement, because there's a kind of hunger, isn't there? we might find a particular teacher or teaching that we stick with for a long time, but similarly at the same time there's all these other teachings we want to take in as well, just because the truth is expressing itself differently in each teaching and teacher. And as you said, it's something within me was just very hungry for that, and still is. It's never gone away, that. But out of joy, then, like, which way is expressing itself through this particular being right now, and the diversity of that was wonderful.
Thank you.
Good to talk to you. Okay. Anyone else like to share the good times or the bad times? Or does anyone have a question? Or have I talked to everyone? Okay, Andy? I'm going to talk everyone into oblivion, sorry.
Hi, Helen. Thank you for your talk today.
Hi.
You talked about, I want to talk about building the fire. You mentioned just keep building the fire inside. And, here in Awakening Together, Regina has introduced us to the teachings of Michael Langford. And he says, increasing the extremely intense desire for liberation is the most important step towards liberation.
Yeah.
When I contemplate that, it just it seems like it's hard to find the ability to increase, that to build that fire. In other words, I seem to be able to, I see the fire building. It's like, as long as it's like attending a garden. I keep the garden weeded, and I see this little plant emerging, right? And
yeah.
and the fire is building. I can see it. I can witness it building, but I can't see what to do or how to act. And to purposely build the fire. I can allow the fire to build. I just wonder if you have any comments on that.
Allowing it to build is just as good, and if there is a purpose for suffering, it is that, isn't it? It will fuel the fire. Every time I suffer and feel bad, I will feel somehow more resolved when I come out the other side of that, or even during it. And if the fire is building on its own, then that's totally okay. We don't have to work with it in a kind of a personal way, meaning that there is a certain point where it just goes on its own, doesn't it? It keeps building by itself. In the initial phases, our energies are split all over the place. Our focus, what we really want, may be divided into a lot of different places. We might want things in our career, in our awakening, in our marriage, or whatever it is that we're going through in that moment. But there came a point for me where I realized everything else that I want in a worldly way, my kids to be happy, and all of that, is going to come anyway if I can realize what I really am and live as that. So that really tipped the scales for me in where my focus was going throughout the day. Remembering to bring my attention back to what was real. All of that just began to happen more effortlessly from that recognition. That everything else that I want is going to happen because of this awakening. And maybe it's a more direct way to get what I want as well. So that kind of all kind of came together to really the fire just started to build by itself, and it's still increasing now. It hasn't gone out. It's stronger than ever, actually, which surprised me greatly. I thought it would somehow, I wouldn't need it anymore. When it's really love of truth, isn't it? It's love of truth we're talking about, devotion, that fire, and the intensity of it has to be fueled at a certain point. It just happens by itself, where nothing else is, and you're already at that stage where nothing else other than a full and final awakening is going to satisfy you. So it's not like a chore to go tend that garden anymore, is it? It's just happening anyway. And you're watching every day. You go out and look at your beautiful flower or plant that's growing and go, wow, it's grown a little bit more. It's not a chore anymore in that way. You can feel something subtle shift. Why am I meditating? Why am I doing that? Is it because I'm trying to get somewhere? Or is it because something is just falling more and more in love with the truth inside? Can you feel that going on, and your motivation for doing all of this is shifting? Good.
Yeah, thank you, Helen.
Good. Wonderful question. Does anyone else like to? We've got time for one more, maybe? Or if there's anything you'd like to know about my own journey, or I promise not to talk for 30 minutes. Zoe, when you're ready.
Hi, Helen. That was so helpful. And especially the parts of, well, just the whole thing. It was so helpful that even when taking a break, that there's something that is already so hooked that it brings, keeps bringing you back. And particularly, it was so good to hear the part of when a big seeing happens, then there's this accompanying rush of other stuff that comes up, which that seems to be what's happening with me. I see something and then boom, here comes all this other stuff. But I know now with your guidance, it's like, yay, it's coming up, yay. But does there come a point where that starts tapering off, or should I just put that thought out of my mind and just keep welcoming the...
When you say tapering off, do you mean the stuff coming up after the seeing?
Yes, the stuff coming up after the seeing.
Yes, it begins to diminish, as you're sort of looking at what's coming up. Excuse me. And integrating, working with what you've had revealed, it sort of flushes out this other stuff. At first, that is a very up and down process. Like I might have this real peak experience moment where I see something that's like, whoa, and then the next thing that happens is all this stuff that doesn't fit with that comes up. So it's very much a roller coaster. But as your seeing deepens, this is what I've always been. I'm discovering it now, but it's what I've always been. Then those peaks and troughs level out, and eventually you might be processing something that's come up after seeing. You don't even realize it's going on because you're just kind of enjoying the experience in a way. And that kind of, those really peak experiences and dips level out into, I'm just kind of always seeing deeper, and I'm always getting more open, releasing stuff and getting more open. But it's not something I'm doing per se, which is really gives us the sense of these highs and lows. If I've got to release this stuff, it's not, it's going to feel like an effort, and I'm going to notice it more. But if you put your clothes in a laundry, as they're getting washed with the detergent, the stuff's just coming out, isn't it? It's not like a separate thing. It's just all happening at the same time. So that's just happening. Every time you see something, those seeings become more and more often, more and more normal, more and more down to earth, less and less, oh my God, and like, oh yeah. And then the kind of letting go is of whatever needs to be released is just also happening in a very matter-of-fact way. Here's just something I thought that wasn't true, and I'm releasing it. You might not even be conscious that that's going on. You've probably already experienced that. You've probably had an experience where you let go of something, but you can't remember what it was. You try to talk about it afterwards and it's just gone. You can't even remember what you forgot. It's just kind of that way. So it does very much level out. And eventually it's just going on, all of it, the seeings, the epiphanies is going on in the background. Even that becomes less and less interesting. It's just happening in front of you, and you're just here. There isn't so much of a person that's, I've had this great big seeing, I'm getting somewhere now. It's just, okay, for the rest of the body's existence, there's going to be aha moments, and they're just happening more and more continuously. So I hope that helps there. Wonderful. Lovely. Okay. So I wanted to just finish before I hand the mic back. I know I've said it already today, but I really want to leave you with this, that at least today I leave you with this, that there is a lot of help available, even if you're in the middle of nowhere and you don't know anyone else that's on the path, obviously like this that we're doing now, but there isn't anyone's door you can go knock on and say, can you help me because I'm really struggling. That there are energies, beings around us, teachers that don't have a physical body anymore, or whatever we call them, particularly guides, spirits, whatever we're going to call them. They are always around you and always working, trying to work for you and with you, and they can help you release these dark energies, and not dark as in bad, just dark as in heavy, slower vibration. So really just want to encourage you to, because it is a free will universe, you must ask for help before you can be helped. Most of us, or at least I did, in those dark moments, I used to forget to ask, so it goes on for a very long time then, and doesn't get released as quickly. You don't have to do all that by yourself. There is so much help, beings in a body and those without a body, currently in between bodies, as they say. So thank you very much, and I hope this has been useful. I hope it's inspired you to push on, keep on keeping on. Thank you. Namaste.